Hello, happy 4th, and welcome to my new property in Canyon City, Colorado, where I'll be working on and sharing with you the 6-inch summer squares and also making this property a home. It's pretty rough as it's been abandoned for a couple years, but it's lush and it's beautiful, and the potential makes my head swim with ideas. We've seen lots of raccoons, deer, and even a bear sauntered by the trailer at 5 in the morning last week. Wow, it was thrilling and a bit surreal as I sat and wondered who let him out of his cage at the zoo. If you're interested in watching the land transform, I have started a new channel called Gameplay Drifters here on YouTube, and I put the link in the description of this video. Please subscribe and see all the tear down, clean up, rebuild, and artful reclaiming we intend to do. This property will undoubtedly be my life's work. But for now, back to the textiles. So this is my little sitting area for a while until I get these houses torn down and we rebuild. We're going to be living, oh, my neighbor's busy doing something. We're going to be living here in Buffy, the Airstream, on the property. And it's kind of great. It's like this perpetual camping trip. But I will be doing a lot of stitching and a lot of taping and a lot of sharing of these videos with you from this property now because we'll be spending a lot of our time here. After making the Chinese lantern box project boxes, these guys here, I found myself really enjoying making these little 6-inch squares. Lots of different techniques, lots of different ways to play without that, oh, here goes another huge project I have looming, or oh, I'm going to mess this up or whatever. You know, it's just a nice way to learn how to do different things and play with color schemes and play with the materials that you have and build on those skills. So we're going to be doing a series of 6-inch squares, mostly handwork, pretty much probably all handwork, so anybody can do it. You don't need anything fancy or special. You know, there's something really magical about just being able to go anywhere you want to and taking your project box or, you know, a little bowl filled with like fabrics and scissors and all your sewing goodies and just sit and create for a while without having to be sitting over your machine or whatnot. So that's what we're going to be doing. You know, and I love machine work. Don't get me wrong. I wrote a whole book on machine quilting and quilt as you're inspired to create, where one block will inspire the next block. And that's what we'll be doing here. But the other thing is I've got these journals that I've got 2 of these that I've started, and I want to fill these pages up, and the 6-inch square thing is perfect for that. So next week I am going to be showing you how to do this journal, like how to set it all up, and then the Coptic stitch binding on the side. And that way your squares you can either put in the journal or you can save them aside for a quilt. I will be doing 6.5-inch squares so that the 6-inch squares are finished. That way you can fold the edges under if you're going to do a journal, or if you're going to put them in a quilt, you've got that seam allowance. You know, and then as far as materials go, I'd say just grab some fabrics in a color scheme that you like and sort of stay coordinating in case you do decide that you want to do these in a quilt, or you want to make a journal that's got, you know, the same sort of color thing going on. You know, you can take a fabric that you like and then just use the colors inside that fabric. It's really easy to pull fabrics and yarns and threads and beads that go with a variegated fabric or something with a motif that you like. If you want to follow along and you really don't have that many materials, definitely hop onto my Etsy store, which is called Myhre Designs. I've got some kits on there. Some of them are kits from previous tutorials that I've done here on YouTube. But they would still work really great for anything you wanted to do because they're color coordinated kits that have all the different components that you might need. And the mess kits are really great because there's fabrics, yarns, beads, and threads. They're $30 and it gets you started at least in your color story. So definitely hop on there, check it out. I will be adding some more things. I will be putting the pattern for the crochet mandala, which is this. That's almost done. I'm just test crocheting it now to make sure it's all right and putting pictures in and all that good stuff. And then I'm also going to have the pattern for this bowl. Like, I absolutely love this bowl. I'm obsessed with these little things where I can have, okay, here's this color story and I'm working on so-and-so or whatever. So I have a lot of these little things around. And I will be writing this pattern up. So I will have some PDF patterns, and then as I move down here from Denver, I will be putting a lot of stuff on Etsy that I've been meaning to do for the last couple of years. So check it out, keep looking, and please still definitely share your work on the Mandala Unplugged Facebook group. If you haven't joined that, go ahead and join that. If you're not on Facebook, send me your pictures at nittycat@comcast.net, and I love to share students' work in the videos. So, and speaking of that, I've got a few photos that have come through since my last video, so I want to share them here with you now, just to let you know, like, you're in good company. You know, we're all stitching together. I want to see your work. I want to learn from you too. Like, you guys have amazing ideas. I love the ideas that have come through. Just based on an idea that I've shared, then you guys will be like, oh, you know what, I like that, but maybe I want to do this. And then I see that and I'm like, oh my God, that's genius, you know? So I love the idea of making this a stitch along, and it means so much to me that you're following along and watching and stitching with me. It's like, kind of reminds me when I had Nitty Cat, my old yarn shop, and we'd stitch together. And as much as I don't miss having a retail store, I definitely miss my community of knitters and crocheters and stitchers that would come in and stitch with me. That was always so much fun. I love, love, love that. And I miss you guys. This week, just for this video, I'm going to show you how to do this wonky log cabin. This is like scissors, needle, thread, and fabric. Like, no rotary cutter, no measuring, no anything. Let's just like cut them with scissors. I could sit right here in this chair and make a wonky log cabin. You know, it's so much fun. And then I will show you how to do a basic crazy patch square. Now, I'm going to show you this in a smaller square, but definitely you'll be able to make your 6-inch square if that's what you decide you want to do. But I came up with a need for this little project I'm going to show you. So I'm going to do a little bit smaller one, but I'll talk about that as I talk through the video and show you that. So those are the two things that we're going to do this week: is log cabin, wonky log cabin, and crazy patch. And with that, let's just go ahead and get started.
Okay, so for the wonky log cabin square, you just need, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 different fabrics that coordinate. Here I'm using some of the fabrics that come out of the Santa Fe colorway kit. What's really fun here is you could choose a motif in a fabric for the center square, which is about 1.5 inches or so, and fussy cut a motif just to put in the center. I don't really have anything like that with me here, but this fabric with the bursts on it is really cool, so I'm going to just cut a burst out and then use that as the center of the log cabin. I'm not rotary cutting here. I'm just going to take my scissor and simply cut this out all wonky, because I want this square to be not perfect. You know, I'm not trying to go for perfect straight lines or perfect sides. Just as long as they're straight enough that you can stitch on, you're good to go. And of course, if you want to use a rotary cutter and you're comfortable with that, please do. I'm just crisscross applesauce sitting on the bed and just having fun with my little scissors. Now I'm just going to select some fabrics that will surround the square. So I've chosen this yellow. Just going to cut out a little strip that is long enough for one side of the square to stitch onto. Line them up with the wrong sides together and then just clip that extra little piece off. And then just take a regular sewing needle and thread. I really like Aurifil thread. Here I'm just using 1 strand of DMC floss just because that's what I have with me. Tie a knot at the end of the thread, and then 1/4 inch from the right and 1/4 inch down, you're going to start the stitching. And then what you're just going to do is grab 3 stitches, keep your needle parallel with the edge of the fabric 1/4 inch away. Of course, you can measure a 1/4 inch, draw a line, and stitch on that line if that provides you a little bit more security. But remember, this is wonky, so I'm not going to bust out all those tools. I'm just going to stitch along, take my time, and just eye it up and make sure that I'm staying a 1/4 inch away. Once I grab 3 stitches, I'll pull the thread all the way through, and then I'll do a little back stitch to lock it in place. So the first stitch of the next group of 3 or 4, I'll go backwards a little bit and then do another running stitch, picking up 3 or 4 pieces of thread. And I do that every time just to add a little bit of security, just in case that corner gets cut. If I need to square it up, then at least it's locked a little bit down the road, if you know what I mean. But it doesn't take that much more time, and it's just a little bit more secure. When you get to the end, go ahead and stitch until you reach a 1/4 inch from the left hand side and tie a knot in the fabric. I always leave those little corners free because the beauty of hand stitching is you're not locking those corners down, so it eliminates bulk the way that you can press them out, and I'll show you what I mean later. Now for the fun part of stitching any 2 pieces together, regardless if it's hand or machine, is flipping up the color to see what it's going to look like, and just give it a good little press with your fingernails. That's good enough for now. The sides you want to trim up a little bit because you do want to make sure that you have a straight-ish edge to sew the next piece on. And here I'm flipping through my fabrics, and I think I'm going to go ahead and choose this turquoise one. It's like the perfect size, and I'm dying to get the blue in there. So just line the fabric up on the new fabric, wrong sides together. And now that it's getting a little bit longer, we're going to go ahead and just pop a pin on the left-hand side. And then just start your stitching again, a 1/4 inch away from the right and a 1/4 inch away from the top, and just start stitching along like you did up until you get to that little seam, and I'll show you what to do next. Now again, I don't like to lock down the seam allowances in place. I like them to flop open, so I have options when I press. So when you get to your seam, what I do is I'll go down through the fabric on the right side of the seam and up through the fabric on the left side of the seam really close. Or alternatively, you can just pop your needle right through the base of that seam along the fabric and then continue stitching. You want it very secure here, but you don't want to lock those seams down. When you get a 1/4 inch away, go ahead and tie a very secure knot, just like I'm showing here, and then flip it up. Now this piece is too wide, so I'm just clipping it about an inch or so, and I'm clipping it on an angle because I want it to be sort of wonky. So we're going super wonky. So just clip it to your desired width and you start your next seam. The cool thing about log cabin blocks is depending on where you place the colors, you can orient the different blocks to make different visual images if you're doing a big quilt. Now, if you're just doing a 6-inch square just to play around, and for your journal, any color goes, just whatever you think, just use contrast colors so that it's a dynamic block. But in this case, I just wanted to show you, like if I used the kind of warm colors on one angle, which is like two sides on the 45-degree angle, and the cool colors, like the blues, on the other two angles, you can get some pretty cool effects. So here's just a couple of different layouts. Let's say I repeated this block, and obviously it's not going to be perfect. These are wonky blocks, but you get an idea of the things that maybe you could do with log cabins and research them. There's a lot of different information on log cabins. It's the most basic of block. We do it in knitting and crocheting. It's just a very cool way to add color to your blocks. And when you sew them on, traditionally you would sew a side on, turn it a quarter to the right, sew the side on. In this case, where I'm at right now, I'm turning the piece to the right, and now is my decision, do I place another blue here or do I place a gold? So I'm going to go ahead and place a blue and then gold for the fourth side, so you can see that the blue is coming up from one corner and the goldish warm colors are coming from the other corner. Another way to do a log cabin, I'm in my little journal here, is really rough raw edges. It's the same kind of thing where you just start with a square and then stitch on a side. And here I just left the raw edges, and I took size 8 pearl cotton and I just stitched right on top just so we can see the stitching line. And that's a very effective block too. I really like that. Hand piecing will give you really accurate blocks. Like this page in my journal, this was all hand pieced, obviously carefully cut and stitched so you can really get those corners super sharp. No craziness happening at the machine or any of that. It's very relaxing and it's very precise. But as far as the way that the log cabin is built, it is by just rotating your block and sewing a fabric onto the newly stitched side. So you just, again, just rotate your block a quarter turn to the right or left. Just pick a way and stay with it in a traditional wonky log cabin. But just wanted to give you the heads up that if you pre-plan, you can come up with some pretty cool looking quilts. Just a couple little pointers. A lot of times I'll work on a surface like this. So when I'm cutting, I'll line up, a straight edge after I've sewn on the piece and just continue along that line. So as you can see, I just cut with the scissors along that line and it gives me a pretty straight piece to sew on too. Because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll put the piece onto the fabric that I'm going to stitch and I leave a little bit, like quarter of an inch to half of an inch on either side. That way I can trim it up and make it flush with the side. So when you're working straight log cabin, that's not really essential because it's all straight pieces. But when you're working on little angles, you're going to want a little bit of extra fabric on the sides to trim after you stitch the block on. And that's basically it. I mean, the log cabin could not be any easier. It's probably the most basic quilt block. But now we're left with all these little scraps. So this is perfect for the next little thing I want to show you, which is how to construct a crazy patch, like the old Victorian crazy patch. But we're going to go do a little modern take on it. Not today, bugs. Not today. Since we bought our own piece of the forest that has not been habited for a long time by people, the bugs are insane. So you can't even walk away from your drink without a stupid bug flying into it. So obviously, if you're doing a 6-inch square, you're going to want to start with a 6.5-inch piece of batting. If you want to do this little bonus bug topper / coaster project, start with a 5-inch piece of batting. The technique is the same. You'll start by just placing your first piece of fabric, your first scrap, onto the edge, just like I'm doing here. You don't have to fold anything under, and just baste it in place 1/8 of an inch away from the edge just to hold it in place. For your next scrap, go ahead and layer it on the edge of the scrap that you laid previously, But before you stitch it on, you're just going to fold it under 1/4 of an inch and lay it on top of the edge and then stitch it on like applique. Just make sure you're taking tiny little stitches so you don't want to see your thread. If you've done applique, you know to insert your needle directly across from the piece of applique or the new edge that you've come out of. So as your needle is exiting out of 1 or 2 threads of this new piece, directly into the background, which would be the blue here, insert your needle, come up 1/8 of an inch, and then just pierce the fold of the fabric just barely. And here you can see I've let the melon color piece match the edge, so all I have to do is clip that off. I don't have to worry about putting another piece there. I'm just concerned right now with stitching the melon color onto the blue color, and then I'm just going to clip the edge of the blue so that I have a straight edge where I can add another piece. And then here I'm adding a third piece, folding under the side of the brown so that it covers both raw edges of the previous 2 pieces. And I just bury the thread, I just take to the back, and then I just pick it up and use it to stitch from the beginning. It doesn't matter if the thread's traveling across, of course, because it's going to be covered up in the back. If you're going to do this in a quilt, maybe you don't do batting, maybe you do foundation paper, but Crazy Patch is built on a piece of foundation generally, even if it's another piece of fabric. All you do is cut the foundation material the size you want it. In this case, if you're doing the bug rejector, then start with a 5-inch piece of batting. If you're doing a quilt block or a journal page, start with a 6.5-inch piece of foundation or batting or whatever you have. And then it's just basically taking scraps, just laying them on top of each other, any shape, any size, because we're doing such a small piece and we want it to be to scale, maybe your piece isn't any bigger than 2 inches, 2.5 inches. Okay, and then at some point you're going to reach a place where you want to put in like a square, and you're going to want to have 2 edges folded under. So that's all you do is I'm going to fill in this little spot with this 1 piece of fabric. So I'm going to fold over 1 edge and then turn it around and fold under the other edge. And of course I left the 3rd edge raw because I'm going to put fabric on top of that. So that's all you do. It's no big deal. You just fold the 2 edges that you intend to sew and that are going to lay over the other pieces, and then stitch it from one end in the corner, maybe throw in an extra stitch in the corner, and then come back up the side. Put your needle back into the fabric in the background so that it's in the back, and put on your next piece, and then you're ready to stitch it on. And that's it. That's your Crazy Patch all trimmed up, basted, and ready to either stitch into your journal or into a quilt. And if you put a bunch of these together and put them together in blocks, look how fabulous this quilt could be. You see why I could never throw anything away. I save every scrap known to man. It's terrible. But I mean, you can make the coolest things with just the littlest pieces of fabric. So if you made a 6.5-inch square and you are going to put it into a journal or a quilt, you're done. But if you want to continue on and learn how to make this little glass topper and alternate coaster, if you're sitting by your drink, you can take this thing off and then use it as a coaster. So it's dual purpose. Pretty good stuff. So continue on and I'll show you what I did to make this guy. So you've got your 5-inch patchwork square. Cut a 5-inch piece of backing fabric. Place it on top, right sides together, and pin it in place. Then you're going to stitch around the entire square, leaving half of one side open for flipping. So as you're stitching, stay 1/4 of an inch away from the edges and really dig the needle down in there to make sure that it's coming through on the other side. So I just put my finger, and as soon as I feel that little point of the needle, I'll scoop the fabric up. And I just take 1, maybe 2 stitches at a time. I stop 1/4 of an inch before I get to the corner, and then just turn and keep going. So just go all the way around and stop halfway, and then clip your corners just to eliminate that bulk, and then flip it right side out, and then pin the open edge in place, and you'll stitch it together like this. So I'll take the needle and I'll come out of one end of the fold, and then directly across I'll insert the needle to the other side, travel about 1/8 of an inch away, and then when I bring the needle back up through the fabric, I catch the other fold on the other side. So then once you come out of that, directly across on the other side of the fold, insert the needle, travel about 1/8 of an inch, come up the other side of the fold, and just stitch it together and knot it. Okay, so I've pleated 3 of these sides already just to kind of form it into a little square bowl. And all I did was I took 8-inch lengths, but I'm going to say 10-inch lengths because it was a little challenging to tie the knots at the end. So take 8 10-inch lengths of either really thin yarn or DMC floss, all 6 strands. Fold them in half so you have 5-inch pieces. And then what you're going to do is put the fold on the needle. So not the ends, but fold it in half and put the fold on the needle. This will allow you to bring the loop up through the fabric so you can do a lark's head knot. So put that on the needle, come up from the back of the fabric 1/8 of an inch away from the edges, but 1/2 inch away from the corner. And it can be a little challenging to get the needle up through the fabric, but just keep kind of twisting and pulling and getting the needle through there. You'll work it in. And then once the loop is through the top of the fabric, like a piece of fringe, take all of the ends, put it through the loop, and pull. And then you'll have a little lark's head knot hanging off the edge, and then do the other side around the corner 1/2 inch away, and then 1/8 of an inch away from the edges. So you'll have 2 little fringes. You're going to tie those into a really strong knot. Once you have your double knot done, double overhand knot, then go ahead and tie a knot. Just like take all of the threads and tie a knot like I'm doing here. And the secret to getting the knot to where you want it to be is you put a needle into the hole of the knot before you tighten it, and just pull the needle down towards the base, and then take the needle out and pull. And then once you have that, find beads that have a big enough hole where you can put all the threads through, and then tie another big knot with all of the threads, the same method with the needle and everything, so that you can ensure the knot's right up against the bead. and then you can put on another bead and tie a knot under that, and then just pull everything really tight and clip it. And I think for this, since I'm using this for my metal camping cans, I'm going to get metallic beads so it clings to the glass even better, which I think will be awesome. And then of course, if you're doing wine glasses, you can make these, just make them a little bit smaller. You know, this will work great on a pop can or beer can or whatever it is. And I'm not sure, I think those are aluminum, so I'm not sure the magnets will work on that, but on the camping cups, it's perfect. Yeah, and then if you make a set of these with different beads on them, you can almost act like wine charms where everybody knows whose glass is whose because they have different beads on them. So all kinds of options you can do with these. Well, it's been super fun sharing my new digs with you and these two little projects. Next week, we're going to work on journal construction, and I'm going to show you the Coptic stitch, as I said. And then the square we're going to do is a piecing, but it's an age-old Korean patchwork piecing called Pyjogi. And this is best done with double-sided fabrics like solids, batiks, silks, shot cottons, because it creates a reversible fabric, and this is what they would use to wrap their gifts. So it's a fabric gift wrap almost, but we can make it into a 6-inch square for our journals, or you can just keep going with it and make it a gift wrap. It's going to be cool. I got a great message from Debbie who wanted to see more Oya. So I'm going to include a piece of Oya in the seams of the Pyjogi. That's kind of a fun idea that I think would be great to incorporate the two techniques. So get out your double-sided fabrics and your teeny tiny little hooks and threads and beads, and we'll make some Oya and Pyjogi. Until then, happy stitching, and we'll see you next week.